Ambassador John Bolton with us, former national security advisor to President Trump, former United States ambassador to the United Nations. Good to see you, sir, as always. Donald Trump flying home in the next few hours. Do we now know what the Trump doctrine looks like?
No, I don't think we do because I don't think Trump does conceptual thinking. I think he really is transactional, and I think although there's certainly many elements of his foreign policy I agree with, as would many other Republicans, they don't fit together into coherent whole. And I think when you try and put them together arbitrarily, it just makes things harder to understand. I think you have to take him kind of one day at a time, one issue at a time, because that's the way he thinks about things.
Okay, fair enough. So let's do that. In terms of the deliverables he brought back, we've made the point all week that he traded with the Gulf Arabs essentially recognition, credibility, and treating them with respect on the world stage in a way that nobody has in return for massive investment in the United States. Fair deal.
Well, I think it is correct what you say about the way he treated them, and I think that was a positive thing. What he was doing was reversing the way the Biden administration treated them, which was a big mistake. I think the interest of the Gulf Arabs in investing in the United States is just good economic sense, and they want Americans getting involved in their country, so there's more value added there, too. This is an excellent and I think obvious economic proposition for both sides, and even the Biden administration got it when they talked about a corridor between India through the Middle East to Europe and the United States. So on those terms, having more investment and mutual activities economically between the Gulf Arabs and the United States, and ultimately all of them with Israel, as some have already started, I think it's a big plus for both sides.
If we look at this broadly from probably the only perspective that matters, is America safer and better off today than it was when Trump took office and or at the beginning of this trip? Would you agree the answer is yes?
I think the answer is mixed. I think that that Trump may have addressed, I hope he has, although he didn't talk about it, the threat that China posed by trying to get closer, particularly to Saudi Arabia, because China's always in desperate need of oil. And if this visit has helped foil that, I think that's a plus. But the central threat to the Middle East, and really one of the key threats globally, is still the regime in Iran, both its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs and its support for international terrorism. And at least as far as we can see publicly, not much changed on that front, except maybe it got a little worse with this talk of a new deal with Iran, a kind of Obama 2.0.
You say it got possibly worse. We'll play Donald Trump's soundbite right now in terms of what he's talking about a deal with Iran might look like.
We're in very serious negotiations with Iran for long-term peace. I want them to succeed. I want them to end up being a great country, frankly, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. That's the only thing.
I know you're going to say that that's not the only thing. They shouldn't be able to have centrifuges. They should have to give up any kind of weaponization material that should be blown up, on and on. Who knows whether Donald Trump really believes that or whether he is shorthanding they shouldn't have a nuclear weapon and what that means. But in terms of bringing the Gulf Arabs back into the fold of the United States, you point out that Joe Biden kicked them to the curb, treated them basically as, sheep herders with oil. Trump shows up and gives them credibility and respect that they really sort of are yearning for. Having these three countries back in the fold with the United States strengthens our hand against Iran, right?
Well, I think keeping the Gulf Arabs united, the 6 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, against Iran is a key strategic element for the United States and for Israel. And I hope, although tensions between Qatar and on the one side and Saudi and the UAE on the other remain, I think it is a good step. It's been American policy for, 30 years. So reaffirming that is the right thing to do, no doubt about it.
Okay, neoconservative, which I think would be sort of your worldview, maybe fairly, unfairly, but sort of well described. You have the Reagan doctrine of confronting the Soviet Union and winning the Cold War, Bush's doctrine of you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, ... Donald Trump, as it relates to Russia, has taken a different tact. There was a lot of discussion that he might somehow make a secret trip or an unscheduled trip to Istanbul and meet with Zelensky, who is in Istanbul for talks with Vladimir Putin, and meet with Putin, except Putin didn't show up. Here's Trump.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together.
And?
Well, that is the money quote, and that is exactly what Vladimir Putin wanted. He doesn't want to deal with Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky's head of a country he's trying to conquer. He wants to deal one-on-one with Donald Trump. He's successfully manipulated Trump very effectively during the first now nearly 4 months of Trump's presidency. Remember, Trump's original position was, I will solve this in 24 hours. I might even solve it even before I'm inaugurated. So we're now just shy of 4 months into the administration. The ceasefire effort is going nowhere. What Putin wants is to cut a deal with Trump, because Trump has already given away key elements of what had been the unanimous NATO position. He said that he won't insist on full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. He won't agree to Ukrainian membership in NATO. He won't agree to NATO security guarantees for Ukraine. And it's not at all clear there'll be U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine. So Putin's already put that in his pocket, and I think now he wants to talk to Trump, see what else he can get.
You say see what else he can get. Trump has been pretty resolute after giving up those things. That you and I may have disagreed on this. Those things are pretty much baked in. We can all agree that that's sort of what was going to happen. Now, you make the point Trump gave up something for nothing. That's not great negotiating. That's not great art of the deal. But is there any reason for Vladimir Putin to believe he is going to get more versus the risk? I think it's a real risk of embarrassing Donald Trump and Trump doing to Putin what he did say to Kim Jong-un or the Iranians.
I don't think those things were baked in. I don't think those things were baked in. But let's look at what a one-on-one Trump-Putin meeting gets Putin before it even starts. Number one, that pesky Zelensky's nowhere around. And number two, neither of those pesky Europeans that have been harassing and threatening Russia with their 17th round of sanctions. So sitting down with Trump is the ideal for now going on 8 years, over 8 years, counting the interregnum between Trump's terms. Putin has thought about how to manipulate Trump. I think he's done very well at it. And he's just shown the Europeans their efforts are meaningless to him and basically meaningless to Trump. So I think it won't take long. My prediction would be a Trump-Putin meeting could be arranged fairly quickly, and that's where they'll cut whatever the final deal is going to be.
We have said that this was the best week Donald Trump has had of either presidency, really, in terms of what's happened domestically and internationally. And you're saying that if Vladimir Putin and he get together in the next couple of weeks, you view Donald Trump as in a weaker position, that he's not strengthened by what's happened so far?
Well, I think if the settlement along the terms that Putin has wanted and that Trump has basically given him turns out to be where the end result is, and particularly if Putin gets anything more from Trump, I think it leaves Ukraine in a far worse position. Okay. It allows Putin to rebuild his army. They're coming back a third time. And by the way, if they pursue the Iran negotiation that Stephen Witkoff, his envoy for everything, has been pursuing, and it turns out to be Obama 2.0, I think that'll be a humiliation for Trump.
All right. Ambassador, we're always smarter after having you on. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.